Clara Whitmore pressed both hands flat against the cold wooden wall of the train car and fought to keep from trembling. Not from fear, from fury. She had just heard 3 women on the platform, women who had never spoken a single word to her laugh, and say that Elias Hartwell must have truly lost his mind to order himself a bride who looked like. She'd already been broken before she even arrived. Clara did not cry. She picked up her bag. She walked off that train with her chin level, her eyes dry, and something quiet and ferocious burning in her chest like an ember that refused to die. If you're watching this right now, I want you to stay until the very end, because this story is going to surprise you. And I'd love for you to drop a comment below and tell me what city or town you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. If it moves you, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. The morning Clara Whitmore arrived in Willow Creek, Montana territory, the sky was the color of a bruise. Not the soft purple kind that fades by afternoon. The dark, swollen kind that means something painful has already happened, and the body hasn't finished deciding what to do about it. The wind came off the mountains, hard and cold and smelling of pine and iron, and the train groaned to a stop like it too, was exhausted from the journey. Clara stepped down from the rail car alone. She carried one bag. A small, worn leather satchel that her mother had owned before her, with a brass clasp that no longer locked properly, and a faint stain on the bottom corner that Clara had never been able to scrub out entirely. She had packed it carefully the night before she left Pennsylvania: 3 dresses, 1 pair of sturdy boots, a small Bible with a broken spine, a photograph she never showed anyone, and a letter she had written to herself at midnight and folded so tightly it looked like nothing more than a scrap of paper. She was 31 years old. She was alone in a way that had nothing to do with geography. The platform was not crowded, but there were enough people gathered to make it feel like an audience. 3 men in heavy wool coats stood near the ticket window, talking in voices too loud to be polite about anything. 2 women in matching bonnets, sisters, from the look of them, with the same sharp, assessing eyes, stood near the edge of the wooden walkway and watched Clara descend the train steps, with an expression that was not quite curiosity and not quite pity, but something unpleasant that lived between the two. Clara felt their eyes on her dress. It was a plain gray dress. Clean, well-kept, but plain. It had no lace, no embroidery, no clever buttons at the collar. It was the dress of a woman who understood that fabric did not make a person, and she had stopped apologizing for that understanding somewhere around her 28th birthday. She looked down the platform and did not immediately see the man she was looking for. Then she heard his voice, Miss Whitmore. It was not a question. It was not a greeting exactly. It came from her left, from a tall man who had been standing slightly apart from everyone else, near the far edge of the platform, with his hat in his hands and his eyes fixed on her, with an expression she could not immediately read. He was older than she had imagined, mid-40s maybe, with dark hair, gone silver at the temples, and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from something harder than wood and hadn't softened much since. He was broad-shouldered and lean at the same time, the kind of lean that came from years of work rather than years of worry, and he was not smiling. But he had come. She had half expected he wouldn't. "Mr. Hartwell," she said. He nodded once. He looked at her bag, then at her, and then he did something she didn't expect. He walked toward her and reached out and took the satchel from her hand without asking. Not rough, just matter of fact, the way a man does something when he's decided it needs doing and doesn't see the point in ceremony around it. "Train's early," he said. "By 12 minutes, she agreed. "Didn't know if you'd actually be on it." Clara looked at him steadily. "I said I would be." He looked at her again, that same unreadable expression, and then he gave a short nod, as though she had answered a question he hadn't put into words yet. "My wagon's out front," he said, "if you're ready." "I'm ready," she said. She had been ready for a long time. She just hadn't known where to go. They walked off the platform together, and Clara felt the eyes follow them, the women in the bonnets, the men by the ticket window. A young boy perched on a fence post who stared with the unfiltered boldness that only children and the deeply rude ever managed. She did not look back. She had made a decision, somewhere on the long, rattling train ride through the mountains, that she was not going to spend her time in this new place, watching to see what people thought of her. She had done enough of that in Pennsylvania. It had nearly killed her. The wagon was a working wagon, not a buggy, not a carriage, a heavy planked flatbed with a pair of bay horses that looked solid and unimpressed by everything, the same way their owner did. Elias Hartwell loaded her satchel into the back with the efficiency of a man who had long since stopped having anyone to be gentle with, and then he came around and offered her a hand up to the bench. She took it. His grip was careful. Not tentative, but careful, the grip of a man who understood that there was a difference between holding something firmly and holding it too hard. She filed that away without comment. They drove out of Willow Creek in silence that lasted long enough to become its own kind of conversation. The town gave way to open country fast. First, a scattering of buildings, a general store, a church with peeling white paint, a livery stable from which Clara caught the warm smell of horses and hay, and then nothing but land. Great rolling swells of it, brown and gold in the late autumn light, with the mountains standing up behind everything like they'd been put there to remind people of their own smallness. Clara did not find the mountains small-making. She found them honest. Elias cleared his throat. "You've never been this far west before." "No," she said. "I've never been west of Ohio. It's different." "I can see that." Mo stopped, started again. "I've been told it takes some adjusting." Clara kept her eyes on the mountains. "I'm not afraid of adjusting," she said. "I'm afraid of staying in a place that's already decided who you are." A long pause. The wagon wheels turned over the dry road. One of the horses blew a breath through its nose. "Fair enough," Elias Hartwell said finally. And that was all. But Clara noticed that his shoulders, which had been held tight and high since the moment she first saw him, dropped just slightly. Like a man who had been bracing for an argument and found one wasn't coming. She noticed that too. She noticed most things. It was one of the qualities that people in Pennsylvania had mistaken for blankness, her quietness, her tendency to watch rather than speak, to listen rather than perform. They had called her cold. They had called her strange. One man, the man she had very nearly married 4 years ago, had told her that being around her was like being around someone who wasn't quite all the way there, like talking to a person through glass. She had not married him. She had thought about what he said for about 3 years afterward, which was probably 3 years longer than it deserved. The Hartwell Ranch came into view as the sun tipped past noon and began its long slide toward the mountains. It was a working ranch in the truest sense, not impressive, from a distance, not the kind of spread that made visitors stop and stare in admiration, but solid and purposeful the way things are when they've been built by someone who intended them to last. A main house 2 stories with a long covered porch. A barn large enough to matter. Several outbuildings, a bunkhouse set apart at a respectful distance, a series of fenced paddocks and corrals of various sizes. A yard that was clean without being decorative. It was, Clara thought, a place that was serious about itself. She could respect that. 3 men appeared from the direction of the barn as Elias pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the main house. They came slowly, not quite reluctantly, but not with enthusiasm either, and they sized Clara up the way men who work outdoors learn to size up everything, quickly, practically, and without much visible expression. The first one, a broad man with a red beard going gray at the edges, touched the brim of his hat. "Ma'am, this is Fletcher," Elias said. "He's been with this ranch 11 years. Runs the day crew." Clara looked at Fletcher directly. Mr. Fletcher blinked. He hadn't expected direct. He gave a short nod, "Miss." The second man was younger, maybe 25, with the kind of face that probably looked younger than it was, and a habit of standing slightly behind the person next to him. "Wade," Elias said. "Good with horse?" "Mr. Wade," Clara said. "Just Wade's fine, ma'am," Wade said. He looked at the ground and then looked back up, and there was something in his face, a kind of careful measuring that was not unfriendly exactly, but was not trusting either. The third man didn't bother with a greeting. He was lean, dark-eyed, and somewhere in his late 30s, with a posture that announced, as clearly as words could, that he had not come out here voluntarily and did not intend to pretend otherwise. He looked at Clara the way men sometimes look at a weather change they don't like, but can't do anything about. Holt, Elias said, and something in his voice suggested he was aware of the lack of courtesy, and had made some private decision not to address it right now. Clara looked at Holt the same way she had looked at the other two. "Steady, unhurried Holt," she said pleasantly. Holt did not respond. He turned and walked back toward the barn. Elias watched him go with a jaw that tightened once and then released. "He'll come around," he said, in a tone that made it clear he wasn't entirely sure of that. "He doesn't have to," Clara said. "I'm not here to be liked. I'm here to work." Elias turned and looked at her. Whatever he was expecting her to say, it hadn't been that. A complicated expression moved across his face and was gone before she could fully read it. He picked up her satchel from the back of the wagon. "I'll show you the house," he said. The inside of the house was clean and spare. A kitchen with a good stove and a table worn smooth from years of use. A parlor with 2 chairs and no decorations except a single framed photograph on the mantelpiece, a woman with dark hair and a serious face who bore enough resemblance to Elias that Clara didn't need to ask who she was. A staircase, 2 doors upstairs, both closed. "The room on the left is yours," Elias said. He said it without looking at her. "I've had the understanding that that is, I thought you'd want your own." "Yes," Clara said simply. He nodded, another pause. "Mrs. Dunleavy from town comes twice a week to help with the washing. Other than that, the house is what it is. I don't expect you to manage it alone." "I'm capable," Clara said. "I don't doubt that." He set her satchel at the foot of the stairs. "But you're not a servant. I want that to be clear." Clara looked at him for a long moment. In Pennsylvania, people had spoken to her kindly and treated her like furniture for so long that she had started to wonder if the two things were different at all. This man, gruff, restrained, badly out of practice with any form of social grace, had just said something that nobody in her recent memory had bothered to say. "I appreciate that," she said. "I mean it," he said with the slightly stiff emphasis of a man who is used to his sincerity being doubted. "I can see that," she said, and she meant it. The first week was not easy and it was not terrible. It was the week of learning the rhythms of the house, the habits of the men, the layout of the land. The way the mornings came in cold and the evenings came in fast, and the work between them had no particular awareness of whether you were tired or not. Clara learned quickly, because she had always learned quickly, and she had always kept what she learned to herself, which drove certain kinds of people absolutely to distraction. It drove Holt to distraction almost immediately. He came into the kitchen on the 3rd morning and found her repairing a piece of harness leather that had been left on the kitchen table, left there, she suspected, as a kind of test, or possibly a kind of insult. Or possibly just left there by a man who had stopped paying attention to where things ended up. Holt stopped when he saw her working on it. "That's not women's work," he said. Clara did not look up from the leather. "Seems to me it's whoever's hands are free work," she said. "Your hands look free." "My hands were free," Holt said, and his voice had an edge that wasn't quite anger but was somewhere in that neighborhood, "before I had to come in here and watch a woman dig through the boss's equipment." "Then go back to what you were doing," Clara said pleasantly. "I'll finish this and leave it where I found it." Holt's eyes went narrow. He was the kind of man who was used to being able to rattle people with his silences, and he was discovering that Clara Whitmore didn't rattle. She just continued doing what she was doing, her hands moving steadily over the leather, her attention on the task and not on him, and that absence of reaction seemed to genuinely unsettle him in a way that aggression would not have. He left without another word. Fletcher found the repaired harness that afternoon and brought it to Elias, without comment, but he set it on the table with something that might, if you were paying very close attention, have been described as respect. Clara paid very close attention to most things. It was on the 5th day that she first saw the black horse. She had been walking the perimeter of the property, which Elias had suggested, and which she hadn't as both an offer and an orientation exercise. She had a good eye for land. Her father had been a farmer, before the drought years, and she was mapping the property in her head the way she'd been taught. noting the fence lines and the water sources, and the places where the ground went soft and would likely go softer in spring. She came around the corner of the largest barn and stopped. The paddock on the far side was larger than the others, and it was built differently. The fence posts were heavier, set deeper, the rails doubled up and reinforced with iron brackets. She noticed all of this in a glance, the way you notice something that has been built to contain something serious. And then she saw what was inside it. The horse was black. Not dark brown, not bay black, the way the sky gets right before a storm comes in fast. He was large, heavier muscled than most horses she'd seen, with a neck that arched like something out of a painting and legs that moved with a precision and power that made the paddock look exactly as inadequate as it probably was. He was circling the fence line in a long, rolling, agitated pace, and as Clara watched, he stopped abruptly, turned his head, and looked directly at her. His eyes were wild. Not mean exactly, she knew the difference, having grown up near enough to animals to understand it. But frightened. Deeply, profoundly frightened in the way that an animal becomes frightened when it has been given enough reasons. "I'd stay back from that fence, ma'am," she turned. Wade was standing a few feet behind her, hat in hand, looking at the horse, and then at her with the expression of a man who has seen something go badly wrong in that paddock and does not want to see it again. "What's his name?" "Raven," Wade said. "Though plenty of men on this ranch have called him worse." "What happened to him?" Wade shifted his weight. "Beg your pardon?" "Something happened to him," Clara said. "An animal doesn't get that way on its own." She kept her eyes on the horse. "What happened?" Wade was quiet for a moment. "Before Mr. Hartwell bought him, we heard he was passed through 3 different owners in 18 months. First one used a whip to try to break him. Second one, he stopped. I don't know all of it, but I know a man lost 2 fingers trying to shoe him, and another got his shoulder put out of the socket when Raven threw him into a fence post. Did anyone try not hurting him?" The question landed in the air between them with an almost physical weight. Wade looked at her like she'd said something in a language he mostly understood but hadn't studied. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "with all due respect, that horse has tried to kill people." "He's afraid," Clara said. "He's dangerous," Wade said. "Those 2 things aren't opposites," Clara said. "They're usually the same thing." Wade had no answer for that. He stood with his hat in his hands and watched her watch the horse, and the horse stood at the far end of the paddock and watched her back, and for a long moment nobody moved. Then Raven took one slow step toward the fence, just one. He stopped immediately after, tossing his head, and wheeled away again to resume his circuit of the paddock walls. But he had moved toward her, voluntarily, deliberately. Wade stared. "I've never seen him do that," he said, so quietly it might have been to himself. Clara said nothing. She stood at the fence until the cold came up hard enough that she could feel it in her fingers, and then she walked back to the house, and she was already thinking. That evening she found Elias in the barn, checking on one of the mares that had recently foaled. He heard her come in, but didn't look up from what he was doing. That was another thing she was learning about him, that he was a man who finished what he started before he redirected his attention, which she found. In an era of men who were always looking past whoever was in front of them, remarkably decent. "The black horse," she said. Elias's hand slowed. He finished what he was doing before he stood and turned to look at her. "What about him? How long have you had him?" 8 months. "What are you planning to do with him?" Elias's jaw worked. "I've been trying to figure that out," he said, with the tone of a man who has been trying to figure something out for 8 months, and is no closer than when he started. "May I work with him?" The silence that followed was the loudest kind, the kind that has a great deal happening inside it. Elias looked at her with something that was not quite disbelief and not quite alarm, but that had features of both. "Clara," he said, and it was the first time he had used her name without Miss in front of it. "That horse has put 3 of my men in the dirt. One of them didn't walk right for 2 months. I know," she said. "He's not a project," Elias said. "He's not." He stopped, searching for the word. "He's not something you fix by being kind to it." "He might be," Clara said. "He's more likely to put you through a fence post." He might do that too, she agreed. Another silence. Elias looked at her with an expression she was beginning to think was his version of frustration, the tight-held quality around his eyes, the way his hands dropped to his sides. Why, he finally asked. Why that horse? Why not just leave him be? Clara considered how to say what she wanted to say. She had spent a long time in her life saying things imprecisely, because she was afraid of how they would land, and she had gotten to the point where she was tired of imprecision. Because nobody bothered to ask him what he was afraid of, she said. They just kept trying to make him stop being afraid by doing more of the thing that scared him. And that never works, it only ever makes it worse. She paused. I know what that's like. Elias was very still. I'm not going to do anything foolish, she said. I'm not going to climb into the paddock tomorrow and expect him to let me saddle him. I know how these things work. It takes time. It takes patience. I just want permission to try a very long beat. The mare in the stall behind Elias shifted and her foal made a small, soft sound. You tell me, Elias said slowly, the moment you think it's gone past what you can manage. I will, she said. You tell me honestly. Yes. He looked at her. All right, he said. She nodded. Thank you. She turned to leave, and she had just reached the barn door when his voice came again, lower, almost reluctant, like a thing said before the decision was fully made. Clara, she stopped. Whatever those people in Pennsylvania said to you. He paused. You made it here. That's not nothing. She stood in the barn doorway for a moment with her back to him. The night was very cold and very dark, and the stars were out in the kind of numbers you only see when you're far enough from everything that the light can actually reach you. No, she said quietly, it's not nothing. She went back to the house, and she sat at the kitchen table and she took out the letter she had written to herself the night before she left Pennsylvania, and she read it through once, in the lamplight. The way a person reads something they wrote when they were still not quite sure they were going to survive, but had decided to try anyway. Then she folded it back up and put it in her satchel. And in the paddock on the far side of the largest barn, in the cold and the dark, the black horse circled the fence line, and the fence line held, and everything else was very quiet. The next morning, Clara was up before the sun. She dressed in the dark, not wanting to light a lamp and disturb the stillness of the house. She had slept better than she expected, which surprised her. She had spent most of the previous 2 years sleeping badly, lying awake in the dark, with her mind running through the same corridors. It always ran through when the lights went out. But something about the silence here was different from the silence in Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, the silence had felt like being ignored. Here it felt like being left in peace. It was the same quiet with entirely different intentions behind it, and Clara's body, apparently, could tell the difference. She went to the kitchen and built up the fire in the stove and put water on. She made coffee strong enough to be worth the effort, and she stood at the kitchen window with her hand wrapped around the mug and watched the darkness begin to separate itself into shapes: the roofline of the barn, the fence line of the paddocks, the long unbroken dark of the mountains behind everything. She heard footsteps on the porch at 20 minutes past 5. The door opened and Elias came in, stamping cold off his boots, and he stopped when he saw her standing at the window. You're up, he said. I'm always up early, she said. Coffee's on the stove. He stood for a moment, and she could feel him recalibrating something, some prior expectation, she suspected, about what this arrangement was going to look like, from morning to morning. He went to the stove and poured himself a cup and stood at the counter with it, and they both looked out the window, and neither of them said anything for a while. You said you grew up on a farm, he said finally. My father's, in western Pennsylvania, mostly grain, some cattle. Hard years? Some, she said. The last few before he passed were very hard. Drought, then rot, then she stopped. Then several things happening at once that didn't leave much standing. I know something about that, Elias said. I expect you do. Another pause. That photograph on the mantelpiece, Clara said carefully. Your wife, my sister, Elias said. His voice didn't change, but something behind it did. She passed 6 years ago. Fever, I'm sorry. She was the one who made this place feel like a home, he said. It came out simply, without self-pity, which made it worse in the way honest grief is always worse than performed grief. After she was gone, it was just a working ranch. He drank his coffee, which is what it needs to be. But it's not quite the same thing. Clara turned from the window and looked at him directly. "No," she said. He looked back at her. There was something in his face in that moment that she thought might be the first genuinely unguarded thing she had seen from him, a crack in the careful maintenance that most people who have been living alone for years build up around themselves without even noticing they're building it. Then he looked away. He set his mug on the counter. "I've got the north fence to check before breakfast," he said. "Fletcher'll be out in the east pasture by 6. If you need anything." "I'll find you," she said. He nodded. He put his hat on and went back out, and Clara heard his boots on the porch and then the yard and then nothing. And she stood in the warm kitchen with the fire in the stove and the coffee in her hands and the mountains turning pale gold in the distance as the sun began its climb. She allowed herself exactly 1 minute to feel the particular loneliness of being somewhere new, in a life that was not yet taking shape, with a man she did not yet know, in a place that had not yet decided whether to have her. 1 minute. Then she set her mug down and began making breakfast. That afternoon she went to Raven for the first time. She did not go into the paddock. She had no intention of going into the paddock, not yet, not until he was ready, and she had no illusions about how long that might take. She brought nothing with her except herself, and she went to the fence at a time when the yard was quiet and the other men were busy elsewhere, because she did not want an audience. An audience changes things. It adds pressure to a room or to a paddock, and pressure was precisely what this horse did not need. She stood at the fence. Raven was at the far end of the paddock. He saw her immediately. He was the kind of animal whose awareness never truly rested, who always knew exactly what was happening in his environment, the way creatures know when they've been hurt enough times to need to. He did not move toward her. She had not expected him. She simply stood there. She rested her arms on the top rail of the fence the way a person leans on something they're not trying to own, just occupying for a moment, and she let him look at her, and she looked back at him. She talked to him after a while, not commands, not soothing nonsense. She talked to him the way she sometimes talked to herself on hard nights, which was plainly and without decoration. "I know you don't know me," she said. "I'm not asking you to trust me yet." That would be an unreasonable thing to ask of anyone who's been through what I've been told you've been through. Raven's ears moved, not toward her exactly, but they were moving. "Tracking. I'm just going to stand here," Clara said. "That's all I'm asking of you today, that you let me stand here. You can ignore me entirely if you want. You don't have to do a single thing." The wind came through the mountains and moved across the open yard and ruffled the horse's mane. He stood very still for a moment, not circling, just standing. "I know what it is," Clara said quietly, "to feel like every person who walks toward you is about to do something that hurts. I know how you get to a place where it feels like the only safe move is to push everything away before it gets close enough to matter. I'm not going to pretend I don't understand why you do what you do." She stopped. The horse was watching her now, the wild, wide-eyed watching that wasn't comfortable yet wasn't trust, but was something. The particular quality of attention that an animal pays when it's trying to figure out if something is a threat or something else. "I'm not a threat," Clara said. "I'm just a woman standing at a fence." She stayed for an hour. Raven did not come to her. She had not expected him to. But at the 50-minute mark, he stopped circling and stood with his head turned partially toward her. And she counted that as something worth noting. When she got back to the house, Holt was sitting on the porch steps. "Heard you talking to the horse," he said. "Probably," Clara agreed. She went to the pump at the side of the porch to wash her hands. "That horse is going to kill somebody," Holt said. "Not today," Clara said. "You can't gentle a horse like that by talking at it." Clara dried her hands on the kitchen towel she'd brought out with her. "You might be surprised what talking does," she said, "when you haven't had very much of it in a long time." She went inside. She heard Holt say something under his breath, but she chose not to hear it. That night at supper, the four of them, Elias and Clara, at the main table. The men eating at the long sideboard that was apparently the arrangement that had been established before she arrived, and which nobody had seen reason to revisit. Elias asked her how it had gone. "Fine," she said. "He didn't try anything?" "No. He let you near the fence?" "He tolerated it," she said, "which is a start." Elias looked at her with that expression again, the complicated one, and Wade, across the room, was very carefully looking at his plate, and Holt was looking at the window, and Fletcher, who was the kind of man who expressed himself almost exclusively in nonverbal communications, was eating with the slight increased deliberateness of someone who is paying more attention than they are letting on. "All right," Elias said. "Be careful." "I'm always careful," Clara said. "I'm just not afraid." Nobody said anything to that. The supper continued. Outside, the night came down over the mountains and the ranch and the paddock where the black horse circled in the dark, and something in the air of the valley felt, for the first time since Clara Whitmore had arrived in it, like it might be capable of change. The days after Clara's first visit to Raven's paddock settled into a rhythm that felt almost deceptively ordinary, almost, because underneath the surface of every ordinary moment, something was shifting. She went to him every afternoon. Same time, same fence, same unhurried stillness. She never brought rope, never brought equipment, never brought anything that could be interpreted as intention to control. She brought herself, and she brought her voice, and she brought the particular quality of patience that is not passive at all, but is instead one of the most active things a person can do, the conscious, deliberate choice made over and over again not to push. The ranch hands noticed. Of course they noticed. Men who work land and animals for a living noticed the way other people notice weather automatically, instinctively, because their survival has at some point depended on it. Wade was the first one to say something directly to her about it. He caught her coming back from the paddock on the fourth day, her coat dusted with cold, her cheeks reddened from the wind, and he fell into step beside her without asking. "He let you get closer today," Wade said. Clara glanced at him. "You were watching." "Not I wasn't trying to spy, ma'am. I just happened to be at the water trough, and I could see my—" "It's all right," she said. "What did you see?" Wade was quiet for a moment, working something out. He moved to the middle of the paddock instead of the far end. "First time I've seen him do that for anybody. He's curious," Clara said. "Underneath everything else, he's curious. He just doesn't know yet if his curiosity is going to get him hurt." "Most animals don't bother getting curious," Wade said. "Not after what he's been through. They just go mean all the way down." "He isn't mean," Clara said. "Not all the way down." She stopped walking and looked at Wade with the directness that still seemed to catch people off guard even after 10 days. "What do you know about where he came from? Before the first owner?" "Before any of it." Wade rubbed the back of his neck. "Not much. Mr. Hartwell bought him from a broker in Billings who didn't have much history on him. Said he came up from somewhere south, maybe Wyoming, maybe further. The broker said he'd been caught wild." "Caught wild," Clara repeated. "Yes, ma'am. So he was free," she said, "and then he wasn't. And everyone who's touched him since has been trying to make him pretend the first part never happened." Wade stared at her. He had the expression of a young man who has just heard something put into words that he has been feeling wordlessly for some time without knowing it. He opened his mouth, closed it, and finally said, "I never thought about it like that." "Most people don't," Clara said, and walked on. It was Fletcher who gave her the first real test, and he did it without meaning to. On the 6th morning, she came downstairs to find a situation already in progress. Raven had gotten through the water trough in his paddock. Apparently, the pipe that fed it had frozen overnight and then split, and 2 of the hands had gone in to try to manage him while they replaced it. She heard the noise from the kitchen, a sound that was not quite screaming, but was the specific high-pitched alerting cry of a large animal, who has decided that the situation is a threat and is responding accordingly. She was out the door before she'd finished thinking about going. The scene in the paddock was already going badly. Both hands, neither of them, the one who'd been identified to her as experienced with difficult animals, had ropes out and were trying to work Raven into the far corner, and Raven was having absolutely none of it. He was up on his hind legs, massive and thundering, and the two men were backing up steadily, with the slightly controlled panic of people who know they're in over their heads, but haven't yet decided to leave. Fletcher was at the paddock gate, gripping the top rail, his face tight with the particular look of a man weighing options he doesn't like. "Open the gate," Clara said from behind him. Fletcher spun around. "Ma'am, you need to get back. I'm not going in," she said. "I need you to get those two men out. Open the gate, call them out, and let me go to the fence." "That horse is going to Fletcher." Her voice didn't rise. It did something more effective than rising. It became very, very certain. "Get them out of that paddock right now." Fletcher looked at her for 1/2 second. Then he turned and bellowed at the two hands to get out. They didn't need telling twice. They backed through the gate and Fletcher swung it shut, and then all three of them were outside the paddock, and Raven was inside it, still explosive, with fear and adrenaline, circling fast. Clara went to the fence, not running, walking. The way you walk toward something you have every intention of being calm about. "Clara," Fletcher said behind her, very low. "Stand back," she said. "All of you, and be quiet." She put her hands on the top rail, and she looked into the paddock and she waited. Raven circled and circled, fast at first, the kind of speed that's powered by pure panic, and then slower still, and after about 3 minutes, that probably felt like 30 to the men standing behind her, the horse stopped. He was blowing hard, his breath clouding in the cold air. His eyes were still wild, but he had stopped. Clara spoke. "I know," she said. "I know that was frightening, but it's done now. It's over. You're all right." Raven's ears swiveled toward her. "You're all right," she said again. Certain. Not asking him to feel it telling him it was true. The horse took one breath, another. The high-held tension in his neck began by the smallest possible degree to release. Behind Clara, she heard Fletcher make a sound she couldn't quite classify. "Lord above," he said very quietly. She stayed at the fence until Raven had fully settled, until his head was down, until his breathing had evened out, until the wild light in his eyes had gone back to the wariness that was his resting state but was not the same as panic. Then she turned around. The two hands were staring at her with their ropes hanging forgotten at their sides. Fletcher had taken his hat off, which she was beginning to understand was his version of a significant gesture. "Now you can fix the trough," she said calmly. "One person, not two." No ropes. She went back to the house. She sat down at the kitchen table, and her hands were shaking slightly, which she permitted for approximately 60 seconds before she put them flat on the table and held them still. That was the first test. The second one came from a more unexpected direction. On the 10th day, wagging them up the road Willow Creek, bearing two women, two sisters, Clara, had noticed on the platform when she arrived. Their names, she learned, were Vera and Constance Aldrich, and they were the wives of the two largest property owners in the county after Elias. Which meant they occupied a specific social position in Willow Creek that they were very conscious of and expected others to be conscious of too. They had come, they said, to welcome Clara. They sat in the parlor and drank the coffee Clara made, and looked at everything in the room with the careful, cataloging eyes of women who are assessing the status of a situation rather than the quality of it. And they said welcome in the kind of voice that means something slightly different from the word itself. We've heard Vera said she was the elder by what looked like 2 years, and by manner like 20, that you've been spending time with that black horse. Yes, Clara said. That seems rather dangerous, Constance said. She had a way of saying concerning things in a tone of mild social worry, like a person who mentions a thunderstorm while meaning a catastrophe. It's manageable, Clara said. Elias has had 3 men injured by that animal, Vera said. She set her coffee cup down with a small, precise click. Of course, Elias has always had a tendency towards stubbornness about his decisions. It's a Hartwell quality. His father was the same way. Elias wasn't my decision, Clara said pleasantly. I was his. Both women looked at her. The horse, Clara added, equally pleasantly. Vera's lips pressed together in a thin line that was technically still a smile. Course. We only mean to say that the people of Willow Creek have been curious about your arrival. A mail-order arrangement is somewhat, she paused. Unusual for a man of Elias's standing. I imagine it is, Clara said. She did not offer anything further. You're from Pennsylvania, Constance said. Yes. Family still there? No, another pause. The two women exchanged a glance so small and quick that most people would have missed it. Clara did not miss it. Well, Vera said, picking her cup back up with the air of a woman concluding a negotiation, you'll find that Willow Creek can be a very welcoming community. For those who find the right footing. I appreciate that, Clara said. They left 20 minutes later. Clara watched their wagon go down the road and then turned back to the house. And she stood in the parlor for a moment with the two empty coffee cups in her hands and the particular tiredness of someone who has just spent 20 minutes translating every sentence spoken into its actual meaning. Elias came in from the barn an hour later and found her at the kitchen table going through a list of winter supply calculations she'd been working on: feed, wood, the dry goods that were running low. He stopped when he saw her face. What happened? He said. You had visitors, she said. The Aldrich women. Something moved across Elias's expression that was not quite irritation and was not quite embarrassment, but had elements of both. Vera Aldrich came here, she and her sister. They came to welcome me. Vera Aldrich, Elias said, in the flat tone of a man reviewing facts, has been trying to find a reason to have an opinion about everything I do since approximately 1873. She's very good at it, Clara said. Elias sat down across from her at the table. He put his hands flat on the surface the way people do when they are about to say something they have decided to say plainly. What did she say? That a mail-order arrangement was unusual for a man of your standing. That Willow Creek can be welcoming for those who find the right footing. Clara paused. Things of that nature. Clara Elias. She looked at him directly. You don't need to explain anything to me. I came from a place where people spoke that way about everything I did for 6 years. I know how to hear what's underneath it. She looked back at her list. I'm not fragile. I know you're not, he said. He said it without hesitation, which mattered. I just want it to be clear that what those women think has no bearing on. I know that too, she said. He was quiet for a moment. She could feel him working through something. Margaret hated Vera Aldrich, he said finally, and the unexpected quality of it, the sudden slip into the personal, made Clara look up. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the table, at his own hands. She said Vera was a woman who had decided the world had a certain shape and spent all her time trying to make it stay that way, he said. She said people like that were the most dangerous kind, because they thought they were doing a service. Your sister sounds like she was very perceptive, Clara said quietly. She was, Elias said. She was the smartest person I've ever known. He paused. She would have liked you. The silence that followed was not empty. It was the kind of silence that forms when something true has been said, and both people are deciding what to do with it. Thank you, Clara said, and meant it the way you mean things when they reach you somewhere you didn't expect. Elias looked at her supply list. You're running calculations on the winter feed? You're going to run short by February, unless you add to the stores, she said. I can show you. He pulled the paper toward him, and they bent over it together, and the winter afternoon light came through the window and lay across the table between them, and something in the house that had been held very carefully in place. Like a door latched against a strong wind, released just slightly. 3 days later, Raven let her open the gate. She did not go in. She opened the gate and stood in the opening and waited. And after 4 minutes of careful watching from the middle distance, the horse came to her. Not fast, not with the easy trust of an animal who had never been hurt. He came the way something comes that has learned to be skeptical of its own good instincts. 1 step, stop. Look, 2 steps, stop, look again. The way you approach something you want but have reason to be afraid of wanting. Clara stood in the gate and did not move. She did not reach out. She let him come all the way to her, and when he finally stopped with his nose inches from her hand, she said, "There you are." He breathed out across her palm. She stood there for a long time, her hand open, not moving, and the big horse breathed and breathed against her skin, and after a while she felt the exact moment his body decided not trusted yet, but decided to give the possibility of trust a single cautious inch of room. Wade was watching from the water trough again. When she turned around and came back through the gate, he didn't bother pretending he hadn't been watching. "He's never done that," Wade said. His voice had the quality of a man who has seen something he intends to think about for a long time. "He did today," Clara said. "How did you know he would?" "I didn't," she said. "I just made sure I wasn't the kind of thing he needed to be afraid of." She latched the gate behind her and walked back to the house, and Wade stood at the water trough watching her go, and somewhere in the back of his mind something he'd believed about what was and wasn't possible had just quietly rearranged itself. The news moved through the ranch the way news moves in small closed communities fast, in fragments, slightly distorted by the time it completed the full circuit. By supper, Fletcher had heard. By the following morning, the younger hands knew. By the time the week was out, someone had told someone in town. And Willow Creek had begun talking about the quiet bride and the black horse in the way that small towns talk about things that both fascinate and disturb them, which is to say constantly and with significant embellishment. Holt was the one who pushed back hardest. He came to Clara on a Thursday morning while she was in the barn, checking on the foal, the little bay who had been born 2 weeks before Clara arrived, and who was now at the stage of young animal life that consists almost entirely of being alarmed by things and then immediately forgetting the alarm. She was crouched by the stall, watching the foal work up the courage to investigate her jacket sleeve, and Holt appeared in the barn doorway with the body language of a man who has been building towards a conversation for some time. "You're making a mistake," he said. Clara didn't look up. "Good morning to you too, Mr. Holt. I'm serious." He came further into the barn, and she heard it in his voice, not the dismissive contempt of the first days, but something more complicated. Something that wanted to be dismissed as contempt, but had other things in it. "That horse is going to put you down. Maybe not today. Maybe not this week, but maybe," Clara said. "That's not an acceptable answer for something this dangerous." She looked up at him then. Holt was leaning against the opposite stall post with his arms crossed and his jaw set, and his eyes doing something she hadn't seen from him before, something closer to worry than she'd have expected, which was interesting. "You're afraid for me," she said. The effect was immediate and significant. Holt's expression went through 3 distinct phases in rapid succession: surprise, denial, and then something that couldn't quite find a landing place. "I'm telling you a fact," he said. "You've been telling me facts since I arrived," Clara said. "But this is the first time you've looked at me while you were telling them." She got up from her crouch, slowly, and faced him. "You don't have to be afraid for me, but I think you might want to consider why you are." Holt stared at her. The barn was very quiet. "My wife used to ride," he said finally. It came out rough, like something that hadn't been said in a long time and had lost some of its smoothness from disuse. She was thrown. Horse came down wrong. He stopped. Looked at the stall wall. It was a long time ago. The silence that followed was careful. "I'm sorry," Clara said. She said it simply, without the overlay of social performance that usually accompanies condolence. Just the 2 words, and the weight she meant behind them. Holt looked at her. The set of his face had changed, still guarded, still not fully open, but the deliberate hostility that had been there since day 1 was gone, replaced by something rawer and more human. "Just be careful," he said quietly. "I'm always careful," she said. "But careful isn't the same as scared, and scared isn't the same as safe." He nodded once, very slightly, and walked out of the barn, and Clara watched him go and then looked back at the foal, who had finally gotten its courage together and was now nuzzling her jacket with the fearless enthusiasm of something that had not yet learned to be afraid of the world. "See," she told it, "you can do that." 2 weeks later, the thing happened that Clara had been working toward without quite naming it out loud. She saddled Raven. She had spent the preceding 14 days doing every step before that step, letting him accept her touch on his neck, his back, his legs. Letting him grow accustomed to the weight of her hand on his side. Letting him smell the saddle for 3 days before she brought it anywhere near him. She moved with the patience of a person who has accepted that patience is not a strategy but a state of being, and Raven had moved with her, step by step, grudging at first and then less so, and then with something that might, in the right light, with the right understanding of what it cost, be called willingness. She cinched the girth carefully, slowly, her hands were steady. Raven stood. He shivered once full body, the shivers that travel from neck to tail when an animal is fighting the instinct to run, and then he was still. "Good," Clara said, "that's good. I know." She did not attempt to mount him that day. She walked him around the paddock on a loose lead, the saddle on his back and nobody in it, and she talked to him the entire time about everything, and nothing about the cold coming in off the mountains. About the foal in the barn, who had started trying to play with the barn cat and kept getting swatted. About a dream she'd had the night before about Pennsylvania, that she was still figuring out whether she was glad she'd had. When she stopped and uncinched the saddle and took it off and looked at the horse standing quietly in front of her, she felt something in her chest that was so large and so gentle at the same time that she couldn't quite get a name onto it. She had done this. Not alone, she was honest enough with herself to know that Elias's permission, Wade's watchful care, even Holt's reluctant concern had all been part of what made this possible. But she had done this. This frightened, furious, impossible animal was standing quietly in front of her, and she had brought him here. She was still standing with her hand on his neck when she heard the gate open. Elias came into the paddock. He stopped when he saw them, stopped and stood completely still. The way a person goes still when they see something they did not expect and don't know yet what to do with the size of it. He looked at the horse. He looked at Clara. He looked at the horse again. "He's wearing the saddle," Elias said. "Not a question." "Just the plain fact of it," said in the voice of a man, accounting for a thing that he is still adjusting to being true. "He wore it," Clara corrected. "But yes." Elias looked at Raven for a long moment. The horse regarded him with his ears forward and his eyes still wary, but standing his ground rather than retreating. For Raven, who had lunged at Elias every time he'd entered this paddock for 8 months, standing his ground was revolutionary. "How did you do that?" Elias said. "I stopped trying to make him be something," Clara said. "I just let him show me what he already was." Elias was quiet for a moment. He walked slowly to where she was standing, the way people walk in paddocks with unpredictable animals carefully, without sudden movement, and he stopped beside her and looked at the horse, and the horse looked back. "He's not going to come at me?" "Not today," Clara said. "Give him time." Elias a long breath, the kind that carries more than oxygen. 8 months, he said. "I had 3 men in that paddock at one point." "I know, you did it alone, mostly." He turned and looked at her. She could feel the weight of his gaze, the way she sometimes felt the weight of the mountains, not oppressive, but present. "Impossible to pretend away." "Clara," he said. "What was his name, in Pennsylvania?" "The man who made you feel like you had to disappear." The question landed with the unexpected force of something dropped from a height. She hadn't told him about that man. She had only said, in the barn that first night, that she knew what it was to be pushed past the point of trust. She hadn't given him the specifics. "How did you know about that?" she said. "I didn't," Elias said, "but I do now. It was the oldest trick and the most honest kind," and she almost laughed. "His name was Robert," she said. "He was kind in public and absent everywhere else. He had a talent for making you feel as though your own perception of things was slightly off. As though you couldn't quite trust what you knew to be true about your own experience." "How long?" 3 years of being considered his, another 2 of recovering from that. Elias's jaw was tight. He was looking at the mountains. "The worst part," Clara said, "wasn't the things he said. It was that I believed them. For a long time I believed them. That's the part nobody warns you about, not the cruelty of the person who hurts you, but the cruelty you turn on yourself after. The voice in your own head, that keeps the whole thing going long after you've walked away." Elias turned back to her. His eyes were dark and direct and had that quality she'd noticed before, the unguarded quality that he carried underneath the maintenance. "Do you still believe them?" he said. "Those things?" She considered it honestly, the way she tried to consider everything. "Less," she said. "Ravens helped with that, actually." Something in Elias's face shifted. Not a smile, not quite, but the preparation for one, the gathering of the muscles that would eventually make it possible. "I'll tell you something strange," he said. He turned back to the horse. "I bought that horse because he reminded me of something I couldn't put words to at the time. I thought I just wanted a good animal." But he paused. "I think I recognize something in him. That particular kind of angry that's really terrified. That particular way of taking up a lot of space to make sure nobody gets close enough to hurt you." Clara looked at him. "Your sister told you that," she guessed. He looked at her quickly, surprised. "She sounds like she would have," Clara said. He was quiet for a moment. Then very quietly she told me that exact thing. Almost word for word, 3 months before she died, he stopped. "I thought she was talking about the horse." "She probably was," Clara said. And also not. Raven moved between them, just slightly, a small shift of weight, a small turn of the head, and they both went still. And then the horse settled again and breathed out, long and slow, into the cold afternoon. "Thank you," Elias said. "For the horse?" He stopped. Looked at his hands. "For not requiring me to be someone different than I am." Clara let that sit in the air for a moment before she answered. "Nobody should have to pay that price," she said. "I stopped charging it a while ago. It cost too much." They stood there together in the paddock for another few minutes, neither of them speaking, the cold settling around them, and Raven standing quiet between the two of them, like something that had finally, not without cost, not without time, not without the kind of work that happens mostly in the invisible places, decided to stay. Then Fletcher appeared at the paddock gate, took one long look at the scene inside it, and did something nobody on the Hartwell Ranch had witnessed him do in 11 years. He took off his hat and held it over his chest, the way a man holds a hat in church, or at a graveside, or at any moment when he finds himself in the presence of something larger than his usual vocabulary. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Clara looked at him. She nodded once. He nodded back. That was enough. That night, for the first time since arriving in Montana Territory, Clara slept without dreaming. Not the shallow unconsciousness of exhaustion, but the deep, repairing sleep of a person who has done something true with their day and knows it. She lay in the upstairs room that had become, over these weeks, something that was starting to feel like hers, and the mountains were invisible in the dark outside her window but present, and the house was quiet. And somewhere in the paddock the black horse was still. And Clara Whitmore, who had come west believing she was running away, was beginning to understand that she had actually been running towards something the whole time. She just hadn't known yet what it was, but it was starting very slowly to take shape. The morning the Aldrich men came to Willow Creek, Clara was already in the paddock. Not at the fence this time, inside it. She had crossed that threshold 11 days ago, the day after Raven wore the saddle, and she had not looked back. Each day she pushed the edge of what was possible between them by exactly the width of what he could handle, no more, and he had met her every time, grudging and cautious and ultimately willing, the way a person meets someone who has proven, repeatedly, that they are not going to use their access to do damage. She was walking him on a loose lead, her hand barely holding the rope, more a formality than a restraint, when she heard the wagon come up the road. She didn't stop walking. Raven's ears went forward at the sound, his body tightening, and she said, "Easy. Just noise. We don't stop for noise," and kept moving, and after a moment his body released and he kept pace with her, because she had taught him, or he had allowed her to teach him, that her voice meant something reliable. She heard the voices before she saw the men, 3 of them. She knew that much from the sound, 2 heavy voices and a third that was lighter, but had the particular carrying quality of someone who is used to being heard from a distance. The wagon stopped somewhere near the main house, and she continued her circuit of the paddock and told herself it wasn't her business. And then she heard Elias's voice, and something in the quality of it made her stop. He was not angry. Elias's anger, she had learned over these weeks, was a cold, quiet thing, a drop in temperature rather than a rise. What she heard in his voice now was not anger. It was the controlled, deliberate steadiness of a man who is working very hard at something that does not come naturally to him, which was almost worse. She handed Raven's lead to Wade, who had appeared at the paddock gate with the alertness of someone who had also heard something in that voice. "Keep him moving," she said. "Don't let him stop." She went to the house. The three men were on the porch. She knew the first one by reputation before she knew his name, Gerald Aldrich, Vera's husband, who was built like a man who had been substantial once and had not yet made peace with the reduction. He was well dressed in the way that announces money rather than taste, and he had the specific confidence of someone who has never been in a room where his opinion didn't eventually win. Beside him stood a man she didn't know, younger, darker-haired, with eyes that moved over things quickly and catalogued them, which was a quality she recognized because she had it herself, though she suspected they used it differently. The third man was older, thin, and had a ledger tucked under his arm that announced his function more clearly than any introduction could. Elias was standing at the top of the porch steps. He did not turn when she came up behind him, but she saw the slight change in his shoulders settling, as though something had come into alignment. "My wife," he said, without preamble, to the three men. Gerald Aldrich looked at Clara with the assessment of a man who is accustomed to evaluating livestock and property and does not always remember to switch modes when people are involved. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said. The name landed oddly. She was still navigating what it meant to carry it, but she met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Aldrich," she said, "we were just telling your husband about an interesting proposition." Aldrich's voice had the smoothness of long practice. "We've come to make an offer on the Black Stallion." Clara kept her expression entirely neutral. "Is that right?" "We represent a consortium of ranchers from 3 counties, the younger man said. He had the precise diction of a man who has been educated past his origins and wants you to know it. "We've had our eye on that animal since Mr. Hartwell acquired him. We believe with the right handling." "What kind of handling?" Clara said. The younger man paused. He had not expected to be interrupted, and specifically had not expected to be interrupted by her. "I beg your pardon? What kind of handling?" Clara repeated. "You said with the right handling. I'm asking what that means to you." "A beat." Aldrich glanced at the younger man, his son. She suspected now, from the shape of the look and then back at Clara with the particular expression of a man deciding whether to engage or redirect. "The kind that produces results," Aldrich said. "That horse has been on this property for 8 months without being broken." "That's a waste of an animal." "He's not wasted," Clara said. "He's in progress, ma'am." Aldrich's voice went gently patient in the way that is not gentle at all. "I've been working with horses for 30 years. That stallion has a reputation across the territory. The only thing that's going to produce results with an animal like that is clear, decisive authority." He paused. "You can't be soft with something that dangerous." "I'm not soft," Clara said. Something moved across Aldrich's face, a flicker of surprise followed quickly by recalculation. Elias spoke. "The horse isn't for sale," he said. His voice was flat and final, the voice of a man who is done with the portion of this conversation that was ever negotiable. Aldrich turned back to him. "Elias, I understand the sentiment, but business." "It's not sentiment," Elias said. "He's not for sale." "That's a fact, not a feeling." The younger Aldrich, and Clara was now certain he was the son, stepped forward. He had the impatience of someone who has decided to skip the politeness portion. "Mr. Hartwell, we're offering a very significant sum. More than that animal is worth given his current condition." "Then there's no deal," Elias said, "since we disagree about what he's worth." A silence. The ledger man, who had not spoken and apparently had no intention of speaking, shifted his weight. 2 days, Gerald Aldrich said. He had adjusted his approach. She could hear it, the smoothness dialing back, something harder coming through underneath. "We'll be in the area through the weekend. If you change your mind. I won't, Elias said. Aldrich looked at Clara one more time. It was the look of a man filing something away for later, not a threat exactly, but the preparation for one. Mrs. Hartwell, he said. Then he turned and walked back to his wagon, and his son followed, and the ledger man followed, and the wagon turned around in the yard and went back down the road. Clara and Elias stood on the porch until the sound of it was gone. They'll come back, Clara said. I know, Elias said. They're going to want to prove something. He turned and looked at her. You think they'll push for a demonstration? I think men like Gerald Aldrich don't accept no from a direction they don't respect, she said. He's going to want to watch that horse. He's going to want to see what I've done with him, and he's going to want to decide for himself whether it's real. And if he decides it's not real, he's going to use that to make the case that Raven isn't what you think he is and should be sold. Elias was quiet for a moment, and if it is real. Then he'll want it even more, Clara said, and he'll find a different argument. Elias looked at her with an expression that was almost not quite, but almost admiring. You figured all of that out from a 5-minute conversation on a porch, he said. I've met Gerald Aldrich before, Clara said, not him specifically. Many times, Robert, Elias said, among others. Elias looked down the empty road. His jaw worked once. I should have asked more questions before I let them get to the porch, he said. It wouldn't have mattered, Clara said. Men like that don't announce themselves at the gate. They walk right up to the door and expect to be let in. The only way you know what they are is to let them talk. And then you know, she said, and knowing is enough. She went back to the paddock. She told herself she went back because Raven needed the consistency of the schedule, which was true. But she also went back because the paddock was the place she felt most clear, and she needed to be clear right now because something had shifted with the arrival of the Aldrich men, and she was still working out exactly what it was. She went in through the gate, and Wade handed her the lead and left without being asked, which was one of the things she had come to appreciate about Wade. He knew when to be there and when not to be. Raven walked beside her, and she thought, what Aldrich had said soft, that was the word people had been applying to her since she arrived in Willow Creek. In the mouths of people like Vera and Gerald Aldrich, it meant useless. It meant decorative. It meant someone who could be dismissed from the room when the real conversation started. She had spent so many years fighting that word, trying to be louder, harder, more visibly capable before she figured out that she was fighting the wrong battle. The word wasn't the problem. The meaning behind it was. What they meant was that she wasn't operating by their rules, and they had decided that not operating by their rules was a deficiency rather than a choice. Raven stopped walking. She stopped with him, automatically, and looked at him, and he was looking at something at the far end of the paddock, his body tight, his ears pinned, and then she heard it too. Voices, laughter, coming from somewhere beyond the fence, and not friendly laughter, the kind that has an edge and a direction. She turned. 4 men were standing at the far fence line, leaning on the rails, watching. Not the Aldrich men, ranch hands from somewhere. She didn't know whose. Young, idle, the specific kind of bored that makes men into an audience for things they shouldn't be watching. One of them said something she couldn't make out, and the others laughed again, and Raven's whole body was vibrating now, his head high, his eyes white-rimmed. Hey! Clara's voice came out sharp and carrying, and all 4 men looked at her, startled. Get away from that fence now. One of the men, the boldest of them, or the stupidest, grinned. Easy, ma'am, we're just watching. You're watching a frightened animal and making it worse, Clara said. She walked toward them across the paddock, keeping herself between Raven and the fence, her voice low and level now because she didn't want to add to the noise. I'm going to ask you one more time. Move away from the fence. Heard you been taming the devil horse, another one said. He was leaning his elbows on the top rail, with the comfortable assurance of a man who has decided this is his entertainment for the afternoon. Heard the boss's wife has got some magic touch. We wanted to see. There's no magic, Clara said, and this is private property. Move away from the fence or I'll have you removed. By who? The first one said. You? She held his gaze. She did not raise her voice. She did not look away. She simply looked at him with the full, unblinking, unambiguous attention of a woman who has made a decision, and something in his expression shifted, the same shift she'd seen in Holt, the same shift she'd seen in Aldrich. The moment when a person realizes that what they're looking at is not what they expected. Then Fletcher appeared at the gate of the paddock, followed by Wade, and both of them were carrying themselves with the particular physical emphasis of men who have a purpose. "You boys need to move along," Fletcher said. His voice was pleasant. His expression was not. The men at the fence looked at Fletcher, and then at Wade, and then at Clara, and the mathematics of the situation resolved itself quickly. They pushed off the fence and moved away, still talking among themselves in that private low way that is meant to suggest the departure is voluntary. Clara turned back to Raven. He had not bolted. He was pressed against the far fence, trembling, his eyes showing white, but he had not bolted. She went to him slowly, still talking, and put her hand on his neck, and felt the trembling move through him like current through a wire. "You stayed," she said. "You could have gone through that fence and you stayed." She stood with him until the trembling stopped. When she finally came out of the paddock, Fletcher was waiting. "Those were Aldrich men," he said quietly, so only she could hear. Clara looked at him. "You're certain? I know the two on the right." "They work the Aldrich South pasture." He paused. "They didn't come here on their own initiative." Clara was quiet for a moment. Did Elias see? He was with the North herd. "He doesn't know yet." "I'll tell him," she said. Fletcher looked at her with the particular expression he reserved for situations that exceeded his usual vocabulary. "Ma'am," he said, "I've been on this ranch 11 years. I've seen men try to get Mr. Hartwell's goat in every way you can imagine. Most of them he handles fine, but this he stopped. This one's different. This one could go wrong in a lot of directions." "I know, Clara. Plan?" She considered it. "I have the beginning of one," she said. Elias's reaction to the news was exactly what she had expected, which was contained and cold and 3 times more frightening than if he'd shouted. He listened to everything she said without interrupting. He stood in the kitchen with his hat still on and his hands at his sides, and he did not move. When she finished, he said, "They sent men to deliberately spook that horse while you were in the paddock with him." "Yes," Clara said, a long pause, "to prove he was dangerous." "To create a reason to call him dangerous," she said. "There's a difference." Elias turned and walked to the window. He stood there for a moment. "I'm going to go down to the Aldrich place," he said. "No," Clara said. He turned back. "Claro," she said again with the same steadiness she used with Raven. "Not louder, just certain. If you go down there angry, you give him exactly what he wants. A confrontation he can characterize however suits him. A situation he can tell the story of later." She looked at him steadily. "You know I'm right." The muscle in his jaw moved. "I know you're right," he said. And the admission had the quality of something being put down after a long carry. "That doesn't make it easier." "No," she agreed. "Right things rarely are." He looked at her for a long moment. Something was happening in his face that she had learned to recognize, the slight opening around the eyes, the release of the careful maintenance, the thing that happened when he stopped performing composure and just felt what he felt. "I don't want anything to happen to you," he said. He said it very quietly, looking at her directly, and she understood that he was saying considerably more than those words contained. "I know," she said. He stopped, started again. "I know we came into this as a practical arrangement. I know I'm not to." He stopped again, frustrated, with himself in the way of a man who has grown unused to saying important things out loud. "Elias," Clara said gently. "Yes, I know," she said. "Me too." His breath went out. Something in his whole body changed, not dramatically, not visibly to anyone who wasn't paying close attention, but she was paying close attention, and she saw it. "All right," he said. "All right," she agreed. They stood there for a moment in the kitchen, and the stove was warm, and the light was going soft outside the window, and neither of them said the larger thing that had just been said between them, because it didn't need saying again. Then Elias reached out and put his hand over hers on the kitchen table. Not a dramatic gesture, not a performance, just a hand placed over another hand and held there. She turned hers over and held back. The next morning, Gerald Aldrich sent a formal letter. Fletcher brought it in with the post and set it on the kitchen table without comment, but with the expression of a man who has read the address and the name on it and drawn conclusions. Clara opened it while Elias was still outside. It was written in the careful, cordial language of a man who has made his career by making aggression sound like courtesy. The substance of it was this: Gerald Aldrich and his associates would be hosting a gathering at the Aldrich property in 4 days' time. Several prominent ranchers from across the territory would be present. In light of the considerable interest in Mr. Hartwell's black stallion, Mr. Aldrich was extending an invitation for Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell to attend and to bring the horse, a demonstration of the animal's progress under Mrs. Hartwell's, as he put it, unique approach would be welcome. If no demonstration was forthcoming, Mr. Aldrich wrote, he would of course understand that the animal's condition did not allow for one. It was perfectly constructed. Refuse, and it confirmed his narrative that the horse was unmanageable, and that Claire's work was a fantasy. Attend and fail, and he had his proof in front of a room full of witnesses. Attend and succeed well. Men like Aldrich always had a plan for that contingency, too. Clara read it twice, then she heard Elias come in through the back door. She handed him the letter without preamble and watched his face as he read it. She watched the cold come into his eyes and settle there. He's boxed us. He thinks so, Clara said. He looked up at her. You're going to say we should go. I'm going to say I should go, she said, with Raven. Elias set the letter down on the table. Clara, this is what he wants. He's building an audience. Yes, she said, but he thinks the audience is for him. He thinks he's constructing a situation where he gets to watch me fail in front of 30 witnesses. She looked at Elias steadily. He's wrong about that. How can you be certain? She didn't answer immediately. She thought about the paddock, about the 200 small moments that had built to the large ones, about the particular quality of the communication that had developed between her and Raven, something that was not training in any conventional sense, but was more like a translation. She had learned his language, he had learned hers. That was not the kind of thing that failed in front of a crowd. But she also thought about Robert. She thought about every time she had believed in herself in his presence, and found that her belief was not proof against his ability to dismantle it. She thought about the ways certainty can be a trap just as much as doubt can be. I can't be certain, she said honestly. But I know what we've built, Raven and I. I know it's real, and I think the worst thing I could do for both of us is act as though it isn't, just because someone has decided to put it on display. She paused. If I hide from this, I'm telling Raven that what we have is something to be ashamed of. That it can't survive the open air. Elias looked at her for a long moment. You're the bravest person I've met in a long time, he said. It came out quiet and almost surprised, like something discovered. I'm the most stubborn person you've met, she said. There's a difference. He almost smiled. Maybe not as much of one as you think. He looked at the letter again. Then he folded it precisely and set it aside. We go, he said. Together, she agreed. The 4 days before the Aldrich gathering were the most intense of everything that had come before. Clara pushed herself, and she pushed Raven, not past the limits of what he could give but right up to them, testing the tensile strength of what they had built. She rode him for the first time on the second day, and it lasted 11 minutes before he decided he'd had enough and let her know by stopping dead in the center of the paddock and refusing to move, which was so far from the catastrophic outcome. Everyone had feared that she actually laughed, the sound carrying across the yard, and got down and told him he had been magnificent. Wade, watching from the gate, looked like a man experiencing something he was going to remember for the rest of his life. She rode him the next day for 25 minutes. The day after that 40, she didn't try to ride him perfectly. She rode him truthfully responding to what he gave her, adjusting to what he needed, staying in the conversation they had been having for weeks, instead of trying to convert it into a performance. She understood, in a way she could not have articulated to anyone who hadn't been in that paddock with her, that the worst thing she could do was try to control the outcome. She had to trust what was real. On the night before the gathering, Elias came to the paddock gate while she was finishing the day's work. Raven was standing quietly, still saddled, his head low in the particular relaxed posture he had developed over the past weeks, the posture that still amazed her every time she saw it. Because she remembered so clearly the animal who had circled this paddock, like something trying to find a way out of its own skin. "How is this said?" "Ready as he's going to be," Clara said. "How are you?" She unsaddled Raven and ran a hand down his neck, and he leaned into it briefly, in the way that still made something in her chest do a complicated thing. "Scared," she said honestly, "but not in the way that means I shouldn't go." Elias was quiet for a moment. "There's something I should tell you," he said, and the quality of his voice changed in the way it changed when he was about to say something important and was bracing for the saying of it. She turned and looked at him. "When I placed the advertisement," he said, "the one that brought you here, I want you to know that I wasn't looking for, I didn't expect." He stopped, collected himself. "I wasn't looking for what I found, I want you to know that. I thought I was solving a practical problem. I thought I was being sensible." "And now," she said. He looked at her with the full unguarded weight of his attention. "Now I think I was luckier than I deserved to be," he said. "And I think whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that before it happens." Clara felt the warm press of that, against something she had been holding carefully closed for a very long time. "You deserve quite a bit, Elias Hartwell," she said. "You just forgot that somewhere along the way." He was quiet. "So did I," she said. "We can both remember." He reached out and took her hand, the way he had in the kitchen, and she held on, and Raven stood between them in the fading light, and for a few minutes the whole world was very still and very clear. Then she let go and finished settling the horse for the night, and she went back to the house and sat at the kitchen table, and she took out the letter she had written to herself in Pennsylvania, and she read it one more time. And then she did something she had not done before. She took a pen and she wrote at the bottom of it, in the small careful handwriting she always used, "You made it." Further than that, "You're actually here." She folded it back up. She put it in the drawer of the kitchen table, instead of back in the satchel. She was done carrying it. Tomorrow was coming, and Clara Hartwell, if she was honest, was going to walk into Gerald Aldrich's yard with the wildest horse in the territory. And she was going to show every person in that yard what trust looked like when it was real. Not because she wasn't afraid, because she had learned, finally and completely, that fear was not the opposite of strength. It was the place where strength began. They left the Hartwell ranch before dawn. Elias had the wagon ready while the stars were still up. Raven hitched to a separate lead line behind, and Clara came out of the house in the dark carrying two things: her good coat and a tin of coffee she'd brewed strong enough to last the hour-long drive to the Aldrich property. She handed the coffee to Elias without ceremony and climbed up to the bench, and he looked at her in the pre-dawn dark with an expression she couldn't fully read, but didn't need to. "Ready," he said. "Ask me again in an hour," she said. He almost smiled. He clicked the horses forward. Raven traveled better than she had expected. She had spent 2 of the 4 preparation days walking him alongside, moving things, the wagon, the other horses. The general controlled chaos of a working ranch in motion, and he had rewarded that preparation by being, this morning, something approaching settled. Not calm. Raven was never fully calm in the way of horses that had been born into gentleness. But he was present. He was with her. She could feel it even from the wagon bench, through the lead line, the way you can feel the mood of something you've learned to listen to. Fletcher rode alongside them on his gray mare. He had announced the night before, without asking permission or inviting discussion, that he would be coming. Wade had said the same thing approximately 10 minutes later, with the slightly less confident delivery of someone who had needed to wait and see if the first announcement went over before making his own. Holt had said nothing at all, which Clara had learned to read correctly as the version of yes that cost him the most to give. All 4 of them were coming. You didn't have to do this, Clara told Fletcher, when they were on the road and the ranch was behind them. No, Fletcher agreed from his mare. I didn't have to do much of anything I've done in 11 years. Didn't stop me then either. She looked at him. You've done something with that horse that I would have bet my wages against, he said. I'm not going to sit at the ranch and wonder how it went. She nodded and turned back to the road. Behind her, Raven moved through the dark at an easy walk, and the mountains were invisible but present, and the cold was the kind that comes before a clear day, and Clara held her tin of coffee in both hands and let herself, very briefly, be afraid. The full fear, the real thing, because she had learned from Raven, if she was honest, more than from anywhere else, that pretending not to feel a thing was not the same as being strong enough to feel it and keep going anyway. She was afraid, she felt it completely, and then she set it aside, the way you set down a heavy thing when you've carried it far enough to know you can, and she watched the sky begin to lighten at the edges of the mountains, and she was ready. The Aldrich property announced itself from a distance by the volume of sound. By the time they turned off the main road, Clara could already hear the noise of a gathering horses' voices. The particular ambient energy of a large group of people who have come to see something and are in the state of anticipatory restlessness that precedes it. She counted 4 wagons ahead of them on the approach road, and as they came into the yard she saw at least 30 people already assembled, ranchers and their wives and hands standing in clusters. The air between them charged with the specific electricity of an event that has been discussed and speculated about and arrived at last. Gerald Aldrich was standing at the center of the yard. He had positioned himself with the unconscious precision of a man who always knows where the center of a room is and gravitates to it. He was wearing his good coat and a hat that had been brushed recently, and he had the look of a man who is satisfied with the setup, which Clara noted and filed away. He saw them come in and his expression did not change, which was its own kind of tell. "Hartwell," he said as Elias brought the wagon to a stop. "Glad you came." He said it with the warmth of a man who had expected them not to and was adjusting his plans accordingly. "Gerald," Elias said. He stepped down from the wagon and came around to help Clara down, and he did it with the deliberate visible care of a man who is making a point without raising his voice. She took his hand and stepped down, and they stood together, and she felt Elias's hand at the small of her back barely there, more acknowledgement than support, and she was grateful for it without needing it. "Mrs. Hartwell." Aldrich looked at her with the same cataloging assessment as the porch. "I'm glad you brought the animal. You asked," she said pleasantly. "I did." He smiled, and it was the smile of a man who has rehearsed what comes next. "We thought we'd set up the South Corral. Plenty of space." "Good sight lines for everyone." "That's fine," Clara said. She felt the shift in the crowd as they registered what she'd said, the immediate lowering of voices, the reorientation of attention. She had expected it. She had been in rooms like this before, not with horses, but with people rooms where someone has arranged for you to be tested and has told everyone about it in advance so that the test has maximum effect regardless of outcome. She knew how these rooms worked. She had failed in them before, and she had survived that failure, and she understood now that survival was its own form of victory that the room never got credit for. The young Aldrich son Thomas, she had learned, was standing near the corral. He had changed from his good clothes into working clothes, she noticed, which was interesting. He hadn't worn working clothes when he came to her porch. He was performing competence for this crowd, which meant he was more uncertain than he wanted anyone to see. She walked Raven from the lead line to the corral entrance herself. The crowd followed at a respectful distance. That was not quite respectful enough. They were too close. Too many voices, and she could feel Raven tightening beside her. His body doing the language of escalating awareness, the vocabulary she had spent weeks learning. She stopped walking. "I need everyone to move back," she said. She said it clearly, loudly enough to carry, without apology. 20 feet from the fence, all of you." A murmur moved through the crowd. Aldrich at her left said, "Mrs. Hartwell, these are serious horsemen." "They're not gonna—" "Mr. Aldrich." She turned and looked at him with the full weight of her attention. "With respect, I'm not questioning their seriousness. I'm telling you what this horse needs to perform, 20 feet from the fence. If that's not possible, we can end this now and go home, and you can tell whoever you like whatever you like about why." Dead silence. Aldrich held her gaze for a long moment. Then he turned to the crowd. "Give her some room," he said. He said it as though it had been his idea. The crowd moved back. Clara turned to Raven and said quietly, "Just for him. Good. See? We're all right, just noise." She felt him breathe. She moved him forward into the corral. Elias stayed at the gate. She had asked him to, the night before, to stay at the fence, to not come in, to trust her, and he was doing it, standing with his hands on the top rail and his face unreadable to the crowd, though she could read it fine from where she was. She unhooked the lead line. Raven was free in the corral. The crowd made a sound, a collective intake of breath, because they all knew the stories, and the stories all ended the same way, and they were watching a woman standing in an open space with an animal that had put 3 men in the dirt. And they were waiting for the part they had come to see. Raven did not dead her. "I know," she said. "I know." He moved one quick, sharp pivot that made the crowd flinch and one woman at the back actually cry out, but it wasn't aggression. It was the body shaking off the tension of too many eyes, the same thing people do when they roll their shoulders or shake out their hands. He came back to center and stood. Clara walked to him. She didn't rush. She covered the distance between them at the pace of someone who is doing nothing more remarkable than crossing a room, and she put her hand on his neck and he dropped his head, just slightly, and breathed out across her wrist. The silence from the crowd was different now. It had changed quality from the taut anticipatory silence of people waiting for disaster to something else, something that had more complexity in it, more confusion. The silence of people revising an expectation in real time and not quite sure yet what to replace it with. "Bring the saddle," she said, to no one in particular, and Wade, who had positioned himself near the gate for exactly this purpose, brought it in. She saddled Raven in front of 30 people who had come to watch her fail. She did it slowly, talking to him the whole time, not the kind of talking that performs for an audience, but the real talking, the kind she did every day in the paddock. About ordinary things and true things, and the small connected observations that had become their shared language. She told him the coffee that morning had been too strong. She told him the mountains looked like they'd had a good night. She told him he was the most interesting creature she had met in the West, and she had met a remarkable number of them. He stood through all of it. She felt the moment the crowd stopped waiting for disaster and started watching something else. The exact moment the tenor of their attention shifted from anticipation to something that was almost like wonder. The thing that happens when you watch a thing you thought was impossible reveal itself as simply something you had not seen done before. She put her foot in the stirrup. She heard someone behind her say, under their breath, "Lord." She mounted. Raven's whole body trembled, that full-body shiver she knew well, the fight between instinct and decision, and she sat completely still and let him have the moment, let him resolve it on his own terms. And after 4 seconds that felt considerably longer, the trembling stopped and he was carrying her. She walked him around the corral, one circuit, slow and steady. Then another. He was not fluid. He would never be the kind of horse that looked effortless, because he had been through too much for anything to be effortless, but he was willing, and willing was everything. She brought him to the center of the corral and stopped. She looked at Gerald Aldrich. He was standing at the fence with an expression she had not seen from him before, not the composed, calculating look of a man running his strategy, but something underneath that. Something that was responding to what he was seeing, before the strategy could intercept it. He looked, for the first time, like a man who was not sure what to do next. His son Thomas was standing beside him, and Thomas's expression was simpler. He just looked stunned. Clara got down from the saddle. She did it the same way she had gotten up, without drama, without announcement, as though this were simply the next thing that needed doing. She stood beside Raven and looked out at the assembled crowd and said, clearly, into the silence, "He's not dangerous. He's afraid. And he's been given enough consistent reason not to be afraid that he can do this. That's all this is." A woman near the back, someone Clara didn't know, a rancher's wife, from the look of her older, with the face of someone who has been outdoors for decades, started to clap. It was a solitary sound at first, unexpected, and then it was joined, and then it was a wave of something that moved through the crowd and reached Clara standing in the corral. And she felt it the way you feel something you have needed for a long time, without knowing precisely what shape it would take when it arrived. Elias was looking at her from the gate. She met his eyes. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His face said everything that mattered. And then Gerald Aldrich did something she had not predicted. He walked into the corral. He came in through the gate and walked toward her at a measured pace, and the crowd went quiet again. And Clara watched him come and kept herself between him and Raven, because that was instinct now. The same protective positioning she used with anyone who moved toward the horse, before the horse knew them. Aldrich stopped 10 feet away. He looked at Raven. He looked at Clara. He looked at Raven again. "I owe you an apology," he said. It was the last thing she had expected him to say. She held very still. "I sent those men to your paddock," he said. "The ones who spooked him." He said it flatly, without elaboration, the way a man makes a confession when he has decided honesty is the only move left. It was a poor thing to do. He stopped. "I wanted to prove that this was—" He stopped again, and she could see him choosing between the versions of himself, the rehearsed one and the real one, and she watched the real one win. "I wanted to prove that what you had wasn't real, because if it was real, it meant I'd been wrong about how things worked. And I've built my whole operation on a certain idea of what works with difficult animals." And he looked at the horse. "And I didn't want to be wrong." Clara was quiet for a moment. "You were wrong," she said, gently but clearly, "but so was I about some things for a long time. Being wrong about how things work isn't the problem. The problem is deciding you can't afford to be." Aldrich looked at her. Something in his face shifted, not dramatically, not a conversion, but the particular small movement that happens when a person hears something they are not going to be able to unhear. "That horse would go for 30 times what I offered," he said. "He's not for sale," Clara said. "No," Aldrich said. "I didn't think so." He looked at her for a moment longer, and then he extended his hand. She shook it. He left the corral. The crowd parted for him, and the particular silence that followed was the kind that means something has happened that will be discussed for a long time. Thomas Aldrich was still at the fence. He was looking at Clara with an expression that was different from his father's younger, less defended, something in it that was almost hungry. "How do you do that?" he said as she passed him at the gate. "The thing you do with him." She stopped and looked at him. He was young, maybe 22. Still in the territory where a person can be told something true and have it actually change them. "You stop trying to win," she said, "and you start trying to understand." He stared at her. He started to say something and thought better of it, and then said it anyway. "My father uses a crop on difficult horses, I know," she said. "Does that—" He stopped, struggled with it. "Does that make everything I know about horses wrong?" She looked at him with the steadiness she had spent years building. "It makes some of it worth reconsidering," she said. "That's enough to start with." She walked away from him and back to Elias. He was leading Raven out of the corral, and he handed her the lead line when she reached him, and his hand stayed over hers on the rope for a moment. And he said, very quietly, "You know what you just did." "I rode a horse in front of some people," she said. "Clara." She looked at him. "Half those people are going to go home and tell the story," he said. "And the other half are going to tell someone who tells someone. You know what you just did." She did know. She felt it, not pride exactly, but something more quiet and more lasting, the feeling of a thing accomplished that had cost the right amount and was worth every penny of it. "Let's go home," she said. They were loading Raven back onto the lead for the return trip when Vera Aldrich appeared. She came from the direction of the house, and she was alone, and she did not have the social armor of her usual presentation, no sister alongside her, no careful arrangement of expression. She looked like a woman who has watched something unexpected happen and is still in the process of deciding what she thinks about it. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said. "Mrs. Aldrich," Clara said. A pause that Vera started stopped. "I came to see you fail," she said. It came out with the blunt honesty of a woman who has decided that the false version would be too obvious to bother with. "I'm sure you know that. I suspected," Clara said. "I thought you were..." Vera stopped again, looked at her hands. "I thought you were the kind of woman who gets in over her head and makes problems for everyone around her. The kind that needs to be managed." She looked up. "I've been managing women like that since I was 20 years old." "I'm very good at it, I'm sure you are," Clara said. "You're not that kind of woman," Vera said. "No," Clara agreed. Another pause. "I'm not going to pretend we'll be great friends," Vera said, with the directness of someone who has decided that honesty, even if late, is better than the alternative. "I'm too old to pretend things like that." "I wouldn't ask you to," Clara said. "But I will say..." Vera stopped again, and this time the pause had a different quality, something working in it. "I was wrong about you, and I told enough people enough things that she stopped. I'll correct it." Clara looked at her. She thought about all the things she could say, the gracious thing, the pointed thing, the thing that acknowledged the damage and let Vera feel it. She thought about what she would have wanted someone to say to her, in all the years of being underestimated by people who then said nothing when the underestimating was proven wrong. "Thank you," Clara said, simply. "That matters." Vera nodded once, sharply, and walked away, and Clara watched her go and let herself feel what that had cost the woman and what it was worth, and both things at once. Fletcher had witnessed the entire exchange from a distance of about 15 feet. When Vera was gone, he came to stand beside Clara and said nothing at all, which was his highest form of communication. "Don't," Clara told him. "Wasn't going to say a word," he said. "Good. Remarkable woman, Mrs. Aldrich," he said. "Fletcher." "I'll stop," he said, and did. The drive home was different from the drive out. The morning had been taut with what was coming. The afternoon was loose with what had happened. Wade talked more than usual, which was to say he talked a moderate amount, which for Wade was practically a monologue. He had been standing in the crowd for the whole thing and had a detailed account of specific faces at specific moments that Clara found herself actually listening to. Because the human reactions to what had happened interested her almost as much as the event itself. Thomas Aldrich, Wade said, looked like he'd been hit with a board about 3 minutes in. "He's young," Clara said. "He might be all right," Wade said. "If someone points him in the right direction." "I tried," Clara said. "I know, I heard." Wade was quiet for a moment. "That thing you said to him." "About stopping trying to win and starting to understand." He paused. "I've been thinking about that." "In what context?" she said. He glanced at her and away, with the sideways quality of a younger person saying something vulnerable to someone they respect. "There's a woman in town," he said, "at the dry goods." I've tried, she doesn't." He stopped. "Tried again. I don't think she likes me much." Clara kept her expression entirely serious. "Have you been trying to win?" she asked. Wade thought about it. "Probably," he said. "Try understanding instead," she said. He considered that for the remaining 40 minutes of the drive with the focused seriousness of a young man taking instruction from someone he has decided to trust. And Clara watched the mountains come closer and the ranch resolve itself from a distance into the specific shapes that had become, over these weeks, the shapes of her life. And she felt something so large and so settled that she couldn't have put a word to it if asked. They brought Raven into his paddock as the sun was getting low. He walked in without resistance, without drama, and went directly to the water trough and drank, and then stood in the center of the paddock with his head up and looked at the mountains for a moment before dropping in the easy stance of an animal that has decided to be somewhere. Clara latched the gate and stood at the fence and looked at him. She heard Elias come to stand beside her. They stood together at the fence for a while, neither of them talking, watching the horse and the fading light, and after a time Elias said, "I need to tell you something. Something I should have said before today." She turned and looked at him. He was looking at the horse. Then he looked at her. "When I placed that advertisement," he said, "I told myself I was being practical. That I needed help with the house, and that was the beginning and the end of it." He stopped. "My lawyer advised against it. He said it was the kind of thing that looked desperate." He paused. "Maybe it was. Maybe it was a good idea anyway," Clara said. "It was the best idea I've had in years," he said. "And I want that is, I think we should." He stopped, and the struggling quality she had come to associate with his most genuine moments was very present now. "I don't know how to say this without sounding like I'm making a business case again." "Say it plainly," she said. "I'll understand." He looked at her directly. "I want this to be a real marriage," he said. "I want you to want to stay. Not because of the arrangement, not because we agreed to something on paper. Because you want to." The evening air was cold and very still. "I already want to stay," Clara said. He looked at her. "I've wanted to stay for some time," she said. "I was waiting to see if you wanted me to." "I want you to," he said. It came out with the simplicity of something finally said right. "Clara, I very much want you to." She looked at him for a moment, this man who had carried his grief alone for 6 years, who had built walls around himself and then slowly, over these weeks, allowed her to walk right through them without making a production of it. She thought about Pennsylvania, about the letter in the kitchen drawer, about Raven standing in this paddock 3 months ago, like a creature trying to find a way out of its own skin. She thought about what it meant that all of it had led here, to this fence, to this man, to this moment that was quiet and real and not what she had planned at all, which was the thing that made it matter. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. And then, because they were both people who had spent a great deal of time saying important things indirectly and had recently decided to stop, he put his hand against her face and she leaned into it. And neither of them said anything else for a while, because nothing else needed saying. Holt was coming out of the barn and saw them at the fence and turned directly around and went back into the barn, which was the most courteous thing he had done since her arrival and also the most characteristic. Inside, at the supper table later, he was the one who poured the extra coffee without being asked. He set the pot back on the stove and said nothing, and Clara said nothing, and Elias said nothing, and Fletcher covered his smile with his coffee cup, and Wade, who had the self-awareness to know when he was the youngest person in a room and should conduct himself accordingly, examined his plate with great interest. The fire in the stove was warm, the house was full of people who had chosen to be there. And outside in the paddock, Raven stood quiet in the dark, and the mountains stood quiet behind him, and the whole valley had the quality of something that has been through a storm and come out on the other side to find itself, against all reasonable expectation, still standing, and beginning to believe that the standing itself was enough reason to continue. Winter came to the Hartwell Ranch the way it always came to Montana, without apology and without warning, one morning simply there in a way that made the day before feel like a different world entirely. Clara woke to the sound of Elias already downstairs, already moving, the particular rhythm of a man who has lived alone long enough that his body operates on its own schedule regardless of what the rest of the household is doing. She lay still for a moment, listening to him, and felt the simple extraordinary fact of that the sound of another person in the house, a person she had chosen and who had chosen her, the ordinary miracle of not being alone. And then she got up and got dressed and went down to make coffee, because some things stay the same no matter what else changes. And a good strong pot of coffee in the morning was one of the things she intended to keep. The first snow changed the rhythm of everything on the ranch in ways she had expected and ways she hadn't. The work didn't stop, if anything it intensified, because cold demanded more of animals and more of the people who cared for them, but the pace of it shifted, became more internal, more focused on the things that mattered and less on everything else. Clara found she was good at winter. She had always been good at the seasons that required people to look inward. She was also, as it turned out, good at something she had not expected. Teaching. It started with Wade. He came to her 3 weeks after the Aldrich gathering with the specific posture of a man who has something to ask and has been rehearsing the asking. She was in the barn, checking the foal who was growing fast now, all legs and ears. With a personality that was beginning to make itself known as determinedly cheerful, in a way that made everyone who encountered him slightly better disposed toward the day. "I've been thinking about what you said," Wade told her. "About Raven, about how you worked with him. What about it?" "I want to learn to do that," Wade said. Not he stopped. "I know I can't just copy what you did. I know it doesn't work like that. But I want to understand how you think about it. The approach." He looked at her with the earnest directness of someone saying something that costs them something. "I'm good with horses. I've always been good with horses. But I've been watching you these past months, and I think I've been missing something." Clara looked at him for a moment. "What do you think you've been missing?" "Listening," he said immediately, like he'd prepared that answer. "I've been good at reading horses, what they're doing, what they're about to do. But I don't think I've been listening to why." He paused. "You listen to why." "I do. Will you teach me?" She considered it seriously, the way she considered most things. "It'll take time," she said, "and it won't look like what you expect teaching to look like. I can't hand you a set of rules. I can show you what I see and help you figure out what you see." "That's what I want," he said. "All right," she said. "Tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock, before the day starts." "We'll start with Raven." Wade nodded. He turned to leave and then turned back. "Also," he said, with a shift in register that was almost comical in its abruptness, "the woman at the dry goods. Her name is Della. I tried what you said." Clara kept her expression neutral. "And she let me carry her parcels to her wagon," he said. He could not fully suppress the quality of his expression, which was that of a young man who has experienced something small and is experiencing it as enormous. "And she said she'd seen me at the Aldrich gathering. She said she thought what you did with Raven was the bravest thing she'd ever watched." "She was there," Clara said. "Her father has a spread east of the Aldrich property." Wade paused. "She wants to meet you." Clara felt something warm and unexpected move through her. "Bring her by," she said anytime. The sessions with Wade started the next morning and continued through the winter 3 or 4 times a week, and they were nothing like a formal lesson and everything like a conversation, Clara talking through her observations. Wade asking questions that were sharper than she expected and revealed an intelligence that had been working quietly under the surface of his straightforward manner all along. Both of them standing at Raven's fence or inside the paddock while the horse moved between them. A living text they were both learning to read more carefully. Holt watched from a distance for the first 2 weeks. He said nothing about it. He didn't have to. She could feel him watching the way she could feel most things, not intrusively, but with the persistent awareness of a man who has not yet decided what he thinks and is still deciding. On a Tuesday in mid-December, he appeared at the paddock gate while she was working with Wade, and he stood there for a moment with his hat in his hands, and then he said, "Can I come in?" Clara looked at him. "Since when do you ask?" she said. "Since I figured out it was your paddock," he said. She held the gate open. He came in and stood at the margin of the session, and Clara continued what she was doing, without adjusting for his presence, because adjusting would have made it a performance, and she was done with performing. After about 20 minutes, she handed him Raven's lead line without announcement and said, "Walk him." Holt took the lead. He looked at the horse looked at him. Raven had not forgotten Holt horses didn't work that way. They had long, associative memories for people, and what those people had meant to them, but the horse he was remembering was the man from 8 months ago, who had carried a different kind of energy then. And Raven was working now with a kind of intelligence that understands when something has changed. Holt walked him, not perfectly, not with the ease Clara had developed, but with a care that was visible a deliberateness that was different from the man who had told her on her first day that the horse was going to kill somebody, and Raven walked with him. And the paddock was quiet, except for the soft sound of boots and hooves on frozen ground. When Holt handed the lead back, he didn't say anything for a long moment. "Then my wife's name was Ellen," he said. "She would have liked this." Clara took the lead. She looked at him steadily. "Tell me about her sometime," she said. He looked surprised. Most people, she knew, said things like that without meaning the invitation literally. "All right," he said slowly. "Maybe I will." He left the paddock, and Wade looked at Clara with the expression of someone who has witnessed something unprecedented, and Clara said nothing and went back to the work. The twist that broke winter open came in January, and it came from a direction nobody had anticipated. A letter arrived from Pennsylvania. It was addressed to Clara Whitmore, not Clara Hartwell, which meant the person who sent it did not know she had married, or did not acknowledge it, and both possibilities tightened something in her chest before she had even opened it. She recognized the handwriting on the envelope. She would have recognized it in a crowded room, in the dark. She had spent 3 years receiving letters in that handwriting, and 2 more, trying to forget what they felt like. Robert. She stood in the kitchen holding the envelope for a long time. Elias came in from the cold and saw her standing there and read the situation the way he had learned to read her, not perfectly. She was not a simple text, but well enough. He stopped. "What's that?" "A letter from Pennsylvania," she said. He waited. "From Robert," she said. The silence that followed had a particular weight. "Do you want to read it alone?" he said. "No," she said. Immediately. Without hesitation, and she was slightly surprised by her own certainty, and then not surprised at all. She had spent 3 years doing things alone that she should have been allowed to share, and she was done with the habit of performing solitude when she didn't want it. Stay. He stayed. She opened the letter. It was 4 pages, which was Robert's particular form of pressure, the volume of words deployed as evidence of sincerity, the length of a document as a substitute for the weight of it. She read it with the same careful attention she brought to most things, and the specific distancing skills she had developed across 2 years of processing what he had meant to her and what he had done to her and what the difference was. The substance of it was this: he had heard she had gone west. He had heard she had married. He wanted her to know that he had thought about her often. He wanted her to know that he felt he had not treated her as well as she deserved. He wanted her to know, and this was the part that she had to read twice. Not because she didn't understand it, but because she needed to be certain she was reading it correctly, that if she was unhappy in her current circumstances, he would be willing to discuss a different arrangement. He was offering her a way back. She set the letter on the kitchen table. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at Elias, who had read nothing over her shoulder and was standing with his hands in his pockets, watching her face with the expression he wore when he was actively not influencing something because he had decided the outcome needed to be hers. "He wants to know if I'm unhappy," she said. "He's offering an alternative." Elias said nothing. "He thinks I might be," she said. "He thinks he's always thought that without him, I would eventually find myself without enough. That the thing I had with him, whatever it actually was the best I could reasonably expect." "Is he right?" Elias said. His voice was perfectly level. She understood the courage that cost him. "No," she said. "Then that's what matters," he said. "I know." She picked up the letter. She carried it to the stove. She opened the stove door and put the letter in, and she watched it cat burn in the 4 seconds it took for 4 pages of Robert's careful handwriting to become nothing, and she felt not triumph, not the dramatic release she might have imagined in some earlier version of herself, but something quieter. A completion. The closing of a door she had been holding partially open for years, without quite realizing she was still holding it. She shut the stove. "For staying." "You asked me to," he said. "I know. I'm thanking you anyway." He crossed the kitchen and stood in front of her, and put both hands on her face, and she put her hands over his, and they stayed like that in the warm kitchen for a long moment, and neither of them said anything. because there was nothing left to say about that particular thing that had not already been said in the only way that mattered by choosing, every day, the life that was here, the real one. The one with mud on the boots and cold in the mornings, and a difficult horse in the paddock, and a man who had learned to say her name like it meant something. The story of the Aldrich gathering spread across the territory through the winter, the way stories spread in places where people live far apart, and news travels slowly, and therefore arrives with more weight than it started with. It grew as all stories grow and the telling details were added, dimensions shifted. The emotional temperature was amplified in the ways that storytelling requires. By the time it had circled back to Willow Creek from other counties, Raven had become something between a legend and a symbol, and Clara had become, in the way that women become famous in stories, larger than any single true account of her could contain. She knew this and did not love it, but she understood it. She understood that people needed the story to be about more than one woman and one horse. They needed it to be about something they could hold on to. She had no objection to being held on to, as long as what they were holding was something real. The real thing was simpler and stranger, and more specific than any version that traveled. The real thing was Raven standing quietly while Thomas Aldrich, who came to the ranch in January with his hat in his hands and the expression of a young man who has made a decision, spent an hour at the paddock fence. Clara had said yes to his visit before Elias could respond, and she had spent that hour doing what she had done with Wade, not teaching exactly, but showing, narrating the interior process, translating the language she had built with Raven into something another person could begin to hear. Thomas was quicker than she expected. He asked good questions, which she had learned was the most reliable indicator of a mind worth spending time on. "How do you know?" he said, watching Raven's ears, when he's actually comfortable versus when he's just decided to tolerate something. "The ears are part of it," she said, "but mostly it's the breath. Tolerance is held. Comfort breathes all the way through." She paused. "It's the same with people." He looked at her. "Your father was tolerating the situation at the gathering," she said. The moment he walked into the corral, something shifted. He started actually breathing. She paused. That's when I knew he was going to say what he said. Thomas was quiet for a moment. "He's talked about you," he said. "Since the gathering. More than he's talked about much else." "What does he say?" "That you're the most direct woman he's ever met," Thomas said. "He means it as a compliment." I think it surprised him that he meant it as a compliment. Clara almost smiled. "Your father could be a good man," she said. "He's going to have to decide whether that interests him." "I think it might," Thomas said quietly. He came back 3 more times before spring. Each time, he spent an hour with Raven, and each time the horse allowed him a little closer, in the way that horses measure people by accumulated evidence rather than first impressions, which was a system Clara had always found more reliable than the human alternative. On his 3rd visit, Raven ate from Thomas Aldrich's hand. Clara watched from the fence and said nothing, and the expression on Thomas's face was the expression of a perceived experience, something that is reorganizing something fundamental about how they understand the world. And she recognized it because she had worn it herself, standing at this same fence, in what felt now like a different life and was actually the beginning of this one. Spring came in March, early and aggressive, the mountains shedding their snow into the rivers, and the rivers running hard and fast, and the land going from frozen to alive with the sudden, conclusive energy of a thing that has made up its mind. The ranch responded: more work, longer days, the foal going from charming to almost hoarse, with the speed that young animals achieve milestones that take people years. Fletcher named the foal without consulting anyone. He simply started calling him something, and the name stuck before anyone noticed it was happening. The name was Persistence, which surprised no one once they thought about it, and Fletcher dismissed as having no particular significance, which no one believed. Persistence had developed an attachment to Raven that was slightly complicated. The younger horse was drawn to the older one's gravity, without quite understanding that the older one's history had earned it. So he alternated between following Raven around the paddock with devoted admiration and being genuinely startled when Raven communicated, as older horses do with younger ones, that there were limits. Clara watched them together sometimes and thought that there was something in it, something about how the next thing learns from the last thing, how what is survived becomes what is passed forward, changed by the surviving into something that can actually be used. She was thinking about this on an April morning when Elias came to the paddock fence and stood beside her and said, "I need to tell you something." She turned to look at him. His expression had the quality of importance, which she had learned to read in him the way she read Raven, by the specific quality of his stillness. "Fletcher told me this morning that he's been offered a foreman position at a spread in Wyoming," he said. Significant offer, more than I can match. Clara felt the shift of that. Fletcher, 11 years. The man who had taken off his hat in front of the paddock the night she saddled Raven for the first time. "Is he going to take it?" she said. "He asked me first," Elias said. He said. He stopped, worked something out. He said he wanted to know if things were going to keep changing here, or if they were done changing. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I thought they were going to keep changing," Elias said. "And I told him that was the best news about this ranch in 6 years. She looked at him. "He's staying," Elias said. She felt the warm press of that land solidly. "You might have led with that," she said. "I wanted to see your face when you were worried about it," he said. Something in his expression was almost wicked, which was new, and which she found she very much liked. "Elias Hartwell," she said. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said. She turned back to the paddock. After a moment he came to stand beside her, and they were quiet together, which was the best kind of together, because it was the kind that didn't require maintenance. Then he said, "I've been thinking about what you said to Thomas Aldrich." "About what you told him? Which part?" "The part about stopping trying to win and starting to understand." He paused. "I've been thinking about Margaret." She waited. "She told me once that I had learned to manage grief instead of feel it," he said. "She said I was so good at keeping the ranch running that I'd made, keeping the ranch running into a substitute for actually living." He stopped. She was right. I knew she was right when she said it. "I didn't change anything." "You changed when you were ready," Clara said. "I changed because you came," he said. "That's not the same thing." "It can be both," she said. "Something can be the right moment and the right person, and it doesn't have to be one or the other." He was quiet for a long time. The April morning moved around them, and Raven and Persistence moved around the paddock, and somewhere in the distance one of the hands was working with the kind of purposeful noise that meant the day was beginning in earnest. "I want to be better than I was," Elias said. "I want." He stopped. Margaret deserved more than a brother who managed his grief and called it coping. "You deserve more than a husband who manages his life and calls it living." He looked at her. "I'm working on it. I can see that," she said. "I'm slow," he said. "You're consistent," she said. "That's worth more." He looked at her with the full, unguarded weight that she had come to know as his truest face, the face underneath the maintenance, the man who had built walls for 6 years and was, stone by stone, choosing to take them down. Not because someone was forcing him to, because he had decided the view from inside was no longer worth the cost of the walls. "I love you," he said. He said it the way he said important things plainly, without decoration, with the weight of a man who does not say things he doesn't mean, and has been waiting until he was certain, and was certain. Clara felt the full size of it, not the word. She had heard the word before, deployed with precision and without substance, used as a tool and as a weapon and as a placeholder for things that had no business being held in its place. She knew the word was not the thing. What she felt was the thing. The specific, irreducible reality of being fully known by someone, and fully chosen anyway. The thing that was the opposite of what Robert had given her, which was the performance of knowing, and the condition of choosing her, only when she was a certain version of herself, only when she required a certain kind of management. Elias knew her, the direct version, the stubborn version, the version who burned letters in kitchen stoves and talked to frightened animals and said hard things plainly and did not apologize for any of it. He had watched all of it, from the moment she stepped off the train in her plain gray dress, and told him she could handle hard things, and he had not tried once to make her be something else. "I love you too," she said. "I have for some time." "I know," he said. "Then why did it take you until April?" she said. "I wanted to be sure I was going to keep deserving it," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "That," she said, "is the best answer you have ever given me." The twist that came at the end of April was the one nobody had seen coming, and it came in the form of a woman named Della. Wade's Della, as the ranch had taken to calling her with the affectionate imprecision of people who have decided a relationship is real before the people in it have officially said so. She had come to meet Clara in February, and had stayed 3 hours and had left with an invitation to return, which she had accepted every week since with the reliability of someone who has found something they needed and is not going to pretend otherwise. She was 23 and capable, and had been running her father's household since she was 16, and Clara had discovered, a particular quality that was rare and valuable. She asked genuine questions and then actually listened to the answers. Not listening in order to respond, but listening in order to know. The kind of listening that changes people. On the last day of April, Della came to the ranch with a different quality of energy, something slightly elevated. Slightly uncertain, the frequency of someone carrying news they are not sure how to set down. Clara saw it immediately. "What's happened?" she said. Della sat down at the kitchen table. "My father has had an offer," she said. "A very large offer for the land." Clara waited. "He's considering it," Della said. "If he sells, there wouldn't be," she stopped. "I'd have to go somewhere, back east maybe, to family." "Does Wade know?" Clara said. Della looked at her hands. "Not yet." Clara was quiet for a moment. "Della, does Wade know how you feel about him?" A pause. "He knows I let him carry my parcels," Della said. "That's not what I asked." Della looked up. Something in her face had the raw quality of honesty that is about to become braver than it's been before. "I don't know how to say it," she said. No one has ever." She stopped. "I don't know if he does," Clara said. Della stared at her. "I've watched that boy for 5 months," Clara said. "He does. He's been waiting for a signal that it's safe to say so." She paused. "Tell him about the offer. Tell him what it means. Let him tell you what he wants. What if he doesn't?" "Then you'll know," Clara said. "And knowing is always better than not knowing." "I promise you that." Della was quiet. "You make things sound very simple." "They're not simple," Clara said. "They're just clear. There's a difference." Della left that afternoon and came back the next morning with Wade beside her in the wagon, and both of them had the slightly dazed look of people who have had a significant conversation and are still finding the ground under it. Wade helped her down from the wagon with the careful attention of a man who has decided that attention is not a performance, but a practice, and Della moved beside him with the ease of someone who has stopped calculating the risks and simply arrived. Clara watched them from the porch and felt something she could only describe as the specific satisfaction of a thing coming full circle, of watching the understanding she had learned in the hardest possible way, through years of having it withheld from her, be given freely to someone who could still build something with it from the start. She was still on the porch when Elias came out and stood beside her and looked at the same sight. "They're going to be fine," he said. "Yes," she said. "They are." He put his arm around her, and she leaned into it, and they stood on the porch of the Hartwell Ranch in the April morning and watched the people they had come to love move through the yard below them. And the mountains stood in the distance, the way they always stood, and Raven moved in his paddock with the easy authority of an animal that has found its place, and Persistence followed him in the way that the young follow what they trust. And Fletcher came out of the barn and looked up and saw them on the porch, and did the thing he did, hat off, hand to chest, the silent salute that was his highest language, and Clara felt the full weight of everything that had brought her to this exact moment, pressing gently against her back like something that had been following her for a long time and had finally caught up. She had come to Montana running from a life that had reduced her to a version of herself she barely recognized. She had arrived in a town that looked at her and saw only what she lacked. She had stood at a fence in the cold, talking to a horse that had every reason to trust nothing. And she had been patient, when patience cost her everything. And she had been honest, when honesty felt like standing in the open with no cover. And she had loved a man carefully and then completely, and had let herself be loved back without making herself smaller to earn it. She had not defeated Raven. She had not conquered the West. She had not become the story that people told. She had become herself. And that was the thing that could not be taken. The thing that lived past every diminishment. The thing that had been true about her all along from the moment she pressed her hands flat against a cold train car wall in Pennsylvania and felt fury instead of tears and decided quietly, ferociously, finally, that she was not going to disappear. Clara Hartwell stood on the porch of her home in the Montana Territory in the spring of a year that had changed everything, and she was entirely, irrevocably, exactly where she had chosen to be. Not because the West had made her, not because Elias had saved her, not because Raven had taught her something she hadn't known, but because she had walked into every hard thing with her eyes open and her hands steady, and she had not looked away, and she had not pretended, and she had not stopped, and it had brought her here to this porch, this man, this life, this morning. And she intended to keep it, every last piece of it, for good.